All right, welcome to Wines Day. This is the December 23rd edition. We've got Matt Weiss with Winebow joining us tonight. My name's Zach. I'm the beer and wine coordinator for Dorncoat Market. My pronouns are he and him. Tonight we've got two wines, the Zardetto Private Cuvee, as well as the Glenelly Cabernet, both wines that Matt and I were talking about, and we figured some bubbles, nice and festive, and then just a nice big cab for all of those rich meals that you might be having over the next couple days. Um, we're going to go ahead and just kind of share the tech sheet for Zardetto. And Matt, if you want to talk about some stuff, we can make that happen.
Thanks, Zach. Always fun to join you for Wines Day.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Zardetto, prosecco. Obviously, tis the season for bubbles. I mean, really, it's always the season for bubbles, as far as I'm concerned. But even more now, as many of you are out there celebrating, and also, of course, for New Year's. But anyway, bubbles is always a great time. I mean, if you're having grilled fish or smoked fish or smoked trout, or veggies, even chicken and roasted chicken and those sorts of things.
I love it with cheese too. I mean, we start off many a Sunday with brunch and a little bit of cheese and bubbles. I agree with you. I think people need to drink more bubbles. Um, if you don't drink like two $10 bottles of wine a week, you could almost drink a bottle of champagne every week.
Right,
So yeah, you can
right.
figure it out if you're with your wine budget, and I would
Well,
like to do
but
that.
but that's also the thing with prosecco and cava, is that it is less expensive, so you
Right.
can drink it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the Zardetto costs around the
Like 14.99. Yeah.
14.99. Yeah,
Yep.
so that's
Yeah.
that's
Super portable.
that's in the budget for everyday wine. I'd say $12 to $15 is everyday wine.
I agree. I
Um,
agree.
yeah, and again, that is such another thing. People look at bubbles as like, oh, something you do for celebration, or this is a very non-PC. But I get from very traditional like wine drinkers or people that they say, oh yeah, the women would love that. Like,
Right.
well, I love that, and I'm not a woman. I am a him. So
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, I love bubbles, and I think you're totally right. I think people pass it off as not complicated or only for celebrations or, like kind of secondary to regular table wine when it should be on your table as an aperitif or as a finisher or just as the main show.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Even if you're not into it, like for the beginning of your meal, have a glass of bubbles. You will start to notice that it makes everything else taste better. You can either
Oh, yeah.
even have like your big reds after that. Have 6 ounces of bubbles, with some oysters or cheese or whatever you're starting, or your salad.
Yep.
Exactly, it will make the rest of your meal taste better. Now, especially with prosecco. So let's just delve into prosecco a little bit. Prosecco even
Sure.
more lends itself to being an everyday wine because of the way it's made. So, of course, Zach, as you know, Prosecco is made in the Charmat method or the Italian method, and which is different from Champagne or Cava or what we call method traditionnel. Of course, the bubbles are done in tank.
Mhm.
So, but in a way, I used to think of that like as a bad connotation or a negative connotation, but I've come to realize in drinking a lot of prosecco and to see the rise in prosecco that it's really a method of having a fresher style and something
Sure.
more palatable, easy. And what's interesting is, especially nowadays, where sparkling beverages in general, like obviously the hard seltzers of the world, but even before that, with the Perriers and the flavored seltzer waters, just
Yeah,
the
LaCroix is a staple in my house.
exactly the LaCroix. I couldn't remember the name of the brand, but yes, LaCroix. So right, that's a staple, and everyone's buying those.
Mhm.
You know, Prosecco in that vein makes a lot of sense. It's just a little alcohol, so it's maybe you could call it the original hard seltzer.
Yeah, there you go.
And so anyway, that Charmat method just gives it like a very um, easy, drinkable, fruit forward, way to get infused bubbles in your wine versus when you're doing a method traditionnel or the champagne method, you have the secondary fermentation happen in the bottle. So the bubbles occur in the bottle that you buy it in.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it, where that secondary fermentation you're talking about is the yeasts are actually making the bubbles, much like with beer. You're getting those bubbles from the yeast strains versus
Yeah,
what you're talking about with Charmat, where they're forcing CO2 into it. So you get this just like brighter expression of CO2 that's kind of those like bigger, more lively bubbles instead of the really tight, kind of concentrated. And there's none of that yeast profile. So you just get those, pear, apple, citrusy, well, instead of those kind of brioche or toasty notes that you'll get with definitely some champagnes and some cavas as well.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's
So
great.
I would even then go as far as to say is like we were back to what we were saying earlier. This is the one of the ultimate starter wines, especially if you're
For
having
sure.
appetizers, and it's a catch-all. So what the other thing that sets Zardetto apart from a lot of is they are situated right in between the two towns that are known as the premier Prosecco growing regions. And those are Conegliano and Valdobbiadene, or Valdobbiadene, as they say it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think there's actually. Did you send me that map as well?
I did. Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
map.
I'll put that up right now too.
Yeah.
That we can kind of see what you're talking about.
Yep. And to give people a frame of reference geographically of where we're talking about in the world, this is, if you go up,
I did.
we have it backwards. That's Glenelly. The one under that is, boom. And then I think there's a map under there. If not,
Isn't that? It's
what
a
it's easy to think about this. This is in a region called the Veneto.
mhm.
And the reason it's that is because it literally surrounds the city of Venice. So you're not far from Venice when you're here. And so what you saw, if you do actually go back to that picture, Zach,
Mhm.
those rolling hills are signature of this area. And that gives these grapes that you grow here, which are predominantly a grape called Glera. Glera used to be known as Prosecco. Now it's known as Glera. They felt that they had to distinguish between the two, and also because now some other grapes are allowed in Prosecco,
Right.
but that actually, especially in this cuvee, really distinguishes it from just your any day average Prosecco. And so there's 60% Glera in here, 25% Chardonnay, and the other 10% is Moscato. And so when you think about why blend those into, well, Glera already has somewhat of a fruity, let's say, profile. And when I fruity, I don't mean sweet. I mean aromatics, ripe fruit, lychee, and green apple.
Sure.
What Chardonnay does then is it kind of beefs it up a little bit. It gives it some texture, some richness, some bite, and more of like the Granny Smith apple profile than the Golden Delicious apple profile. And then after you're done with all that Chardonnay that gives it that bite, well, you want to put some Moscato back into it because that lightens it up again. So it's kind of a fun blend, but it's not like Moscato, like a sweet Moscato. This has 12 grams of residual sugar in it, so it's not really technically a sweet wine. I mean, this is a brut,
Mhm.
and
I like how the Chardonnay kind of gives you a little more acidity too.
Mhm.
So it adds that kind of like, I think green apple is a great descriptor where it kind of gives you that tart quality that you think of when you think of Granny Smiths versus those like, Golden Delicious, which taste like apples, but there's no really, not as much character to them as what a Granny Smith will have.
Yeah, there's not as much as that tartness,
Right.
and when you go back to wine and food, you want that tartness. You want your mouth to be salivating after because it's just going to help you taste the food even better. So then the other things about these Proseccos is it's a fourth generation family. There's still a Zardetto that's making the wines.
That's awesome.
And again, the fact that they're uniquely situated in between these two great towns allows them to blend from the best of the best from all over. And, just for those of you that are thinking, oh, well, what does that do for a wine? Well, I always go back to, if you're cooking or you're baking, it's like having your spice cabinet. So just because they're about 40 miles apart, these towns, but one might have a very spicy profile. One might have a sweeter profile. One might have a very tart profile. And so when you can blend together, you can really get this complete wine that just touches all the parts of your palate and has a lot of complexity and a lot of different fruit and savory notes going on.
Yeah, and I think the same thing. People think of prosecco as kind of simple sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is definitely a showcases how not simple it can be. And with your analogy of them being able to pick the best grapes and then turn it into their own blend, and using their terroir and the ripening of to their advantage, and making sure that they're picking out the very best grapes to put into this private cuvee, to give you this just kind of elevated prosecco. It's not just some easy cheap kind of bubbles that you can get domestically. They've actually put some winemaking skill into this, and it really, I think, comes through in the glass.
Totally. Yeah. And so, tasting it, we've pretty much gone there, but
Yeah.
again, like you just said it, the complexity level versus a lot of, let's just say, your commercial brand Prosecco's or your Prosecco's that are widely available. I really think this sets it apart and makes it elevated. Yeah. So
Yes.
in
Great little shelf find. You aren't going to go wrong with this at all.
No, as a matter of fact, you're going to go very right. I mean,
Yeah.
because there's just that hint of residual sugar also, you can really use this with spicy foods,
Sure.
like Southeast Asian food, like Vietnamese or Laotian, or wherever, or even, and we know this, like sparkling wines and fried foods are just a magical pairing.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So get yourself some spicy, delicious chicken wings, or
Yeah, some Nashville hot would be great with this.
what?
Some Nashville hot chicken.
Nashville hot chicken. There you
Yeah,
go.
would be great. Or I think, like you're saying too, like the fact that the bubbles and fats really interact really well.
Yeah.
Pho would be a weird pairing, maybe on your head, but you've got all those kind of funky flavors. You've got that like slickness of the fat. You've got some spice in there if you want to add it. Plus,
Yeah.
like that kind of lime squeeze and all those fresh herbs, plus the freshness that the Zardetto offers. I think is really would be fun and interesting. And instead of grabbing a beer, you could just grab a prosecco and be in the same boat.
Yeah. And then it also doesn't fill you up as much as beer.
Right. Well, you also get that 11%, so it'll
That's true too.
boost it up a little bit.
Have you, a side note, have you had actual Nashville hot chicken?
Yeah, I got there's so many restaurants, but there was, I think I got a level 3 out of level 5, like hot but not super hot, and I think I got a side of the number 4 sauce, and it was, I kept dipping it in there and then crying and then eating a pickle and then trying to eat 4 rolls to try and calm it down, and then kept going back to it. I wish there was a place that could replicate it. Jack Tar, I think, does a pretty good job locally. They do a spicy Nashville inspired chicken, or they used to, and that was close by. I think that was the best choice, but I don't do a lot of homemade fried chicken. Although I would love to do a Nashville hot at home. I just don't know if that would be a good idea if I mastered that one.
Why hasn't someone done like the North Carolina the ghost pepper?
Yeah,
the Nashville hot chicken.
Yeah. That's a little too spicy for me. I like habaneros. That's about as high as I like to go.
Yeah, but the ghost
Other than
pepper
that,
is just,
it just burns for no good reason.
I'm jealous now because I literally have never had it, and I love spice and hot food. I mean, I'd like to say that I have a pretty large threshold, but in reality, I probably could not handle it before. So
It was hot.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever been to Bull McCabe's,
Yeah.
I think it's Bull McCabe's or what's the other one? James Joyce.
Okay.
They have Devil's Blood hot sauce for their wings. Because the Duke is right around the corner, literally, and that's pretty spicy stuff. Um,
Really?
I I always like end up getting I get them hot and then I get a side of the Devil's Blood because it's too hot if they're just tossed in it. And you eat it and you start going like trying to breathe because you're stifled from the heat, but then you keep eating
You
it.
keep going.
So yeah, you
Sounds
got to. The Wooden Nickel in Hillsborough, they have the double nickel is pretty spicy stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent masochistic endeavor. We should grab a bottle of Zardetto and go.
Yeah,
James Joyce is probably the most realistic because it's right there, or Jack Tar if they have it. But
yeah, and some
yeah,
outdoor seating, and we can party and just cry and eat chicken wings.
yeah, cry and laugh. There you go. Awesome.
Awesome. One thing
Should
that
we?
doesn't personally go well with spicy food is red wine,
Yeah,
especially if they're tannic. Those tannins can really they latch onto the same receptors as your heat receptors and can really just feel like extra bristly and not a personal favorite.
yeah,
So we have the Glenelly Cabernet, another South African. The last time you joined us, we did another South African wine,
yeah,
and we were talking about how kind of it's still a sleeper. People still kind of overlook South Africa. Portugal and Spain, you still get a lot of value in, but you can get a lot of really great stuff and really nicely made wines from South Africa, which is why we're kind of showing off this Cabernet tonight. So if you want to talk a little bit about this, is this another Broadbent wine? Is that how it
No,
comes?
this is actually through Cape Classics.
Oh, perfect.
And Cape Classics, yeah, is also pretty highly regarded South African portfolio. Yeah. So if you Zach, can you go to that South African map again, just because I want to set the scene here about why South Africa is so uniquely situated as well, where when you get to the map, you'll see that you have what's called Cape Town, and then it's the confluence of the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean meeting together. And then you have bays within them as Cape Town sticks out between the two bays. And so you can see there, yeah, Cape Town, and then Stellenbosch is right there below it in false.
Okay.
So there's really no other part like that in the world where you have confluence of two oceans and then a bay. And then not to mention where you go, if you go to the picture that I had sent from Glenelly, you can pull that up. It's in this other place, which is a part of Stellenbosch called Simonsburg. And there you get up in the mountains. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So this is literally where these vineyards are planted. So it's high up. You already have the cooling influence of the oceans and the bays, but then you're even cooler. And you have these granitic soils to add minerality. So this is just like a Cabernet heaven. Because as we know,
does this also do? Is there like a rain shadow from these mountains too?
that's a great question. I've never heard about a rain shadow, but because I think they're technically behind them, actually.
Right. Okay. So
Wouldn't be
kind
a
of
rain
like the
shadow.
Chilean side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Andes kind of form that wall. So like the Argentines get that rain shadow effect for their Malbecs, and then
And
that's
then
why Chile does a whole bunch of Cab instead of a whole bunch of Malbec.
yeah, exactly like that. And plus it forms. So yeah, you have the ocean or the ocean on one side, which is to the west, and then the mountains in the east. So yeah, it's exactly like that in Chile. But yeah, so it just and as we talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, first of all, it's like a grape that is super hardy in the sense that it can grow in many places in the world and it has thick skin. So it loves a place like this. Plus, there's a lot of diurnal temperature change. But what's fascinating about this wine is So this is the brainchild or the baby of Comtesse de Lalande. And Comtesse de Lalande was the owner of Pichon Longueville, which is a second growth and world famous winery in the Pauillac commune of Bordeaux. Pauillac has two of the first growths of Bordeaux, which is the highest, the classification back in 1855, blah, blah, blah. But that really set the groundwork for establishing what are the elite chateaus of Bordeaux. And there's 5 growths, 5 levels, we can say. Pauillac has many second growths, but has 2 first growths. And so just to talk about the validation of where she comes from. But she actually would have a contest every year from the best Cabernet Sauvignon from around the world. And each year there would be 2 or 3 or a smattering of South African Cabernet Sauvignons that were submitted that would just really perform well and get her attention. And this happened year after year after year till the point where she finally had to like go see for herself. And so she went to this place called Glenelly in Siemensburg and fell in love. And like you see in that picture, was like, oh, we can make world-class Cabernet here. Like world-class Cabernet. So much so to the fact that she left Pichon Longueville and came here to make wine. So that's how much she believed in it. And the other interesting thing about that is this blend here is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, whereas in Pauillac, in Bordeaux, are always blends. It might be predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, but you know they're always blends. So, so that just speaks to how dynamic and well cultivated Cabernet grows here. And this is really like unadulterated. You know, as we say, the wines are made in the vineyard and not in the winery, and this is a great example of this. You know, like there's not much going on here. They just harvest in the perfect way possible. The most they do to manage the vineyards is what's called canopy management. So, you know, when you obviously, as you know, when you have vines and grapes growing, there was leaf and canopies around it. And with Cabernet, you have to manage that because if you cut it all back to allow for full-on sunshine with no shade, one, you get super ripe super quick, but you can also get a lot of pyrazine qualities. Or sorry, it's the other way around. If you leave the canopy on and you limit the sunlight, you'll get a lot of pyrazine qualities. And so you know those pyrazines, but for those of you listening that don't know what pyrazines are, there's those green bell pepper notes or green peppercorn notes that you get in the wine that sometimes are nice, but sometimes they're a little bit too much and they're overwhelming. Sure. And it's a fine line about how you manage that. And so that's really like the only thing that they do here. Otherwise, greatly situated. They let it sit on the skins for about 2 weeks to get this dynamic, beautiful color. And then it's aged in French oak barrels. Maybe like 30% of them are new. Just a little bit of that baking spice that we're used to. But that's it.
It adds, I find it adds a nice like fine texture too. I mean, Cabernet can be extremely tannic, and that French oak really gives you that kind of soften and smooths out those tannins a little bit, especially as it kind of hangs out in the bottle a little more. And then once it's in your glass and kind of opens up. I like the piercing qualities. You know, I like Carmenere for that. I like Cab Franc for that. You can definitely get that, you know, like you said, bell peppery. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc can have that kind of jalapeno thing going on. And that fresh cut grass kind of leans into it, which can be really refreshing, but you don't want to just be like, you know, Iron Chef eating the bell pepper kind of thing when you're drinking a you know glass of Cabernet. This, I mean, I think you're spot on. I mean, beautiful color, nice and dense and rich. Yeah, I get, you know, blackberry and dark raspberries to it, so it's got that nice kind of fruit driven with those tannins are integrated. You know, they're there. It gives it some texture. It's not flabby at all. There's a good acidity. And again, like really, I mean, this is drinking, you know, closer to a $30 Napa cab than it is to a $15, $16 cab that just kind of people overlook because they just don't know, which that's why we do these things. You know, we're talking about cool wine that you don't see everywhere and that you should hopefully start to see everywhere, or if you know, then you can kind of get yourself a really great bottle for very affordable price.
Yeah, this is, I think, this is 14.99, or at times it's been on sale for like 12.99. I think
Yeah,
last.
it kind of goes back and forth to that sub 15 and then right over. So, but for what you're getting in the bottle, I mean, it'd be great. This not spicy food like we were talking about, but I think for a ribeye or like a really like heavily spiced glazed ham for Christmas, I think would be really nice with this, just because kind of those fruits and that little bit of texture it's got going on, I think would be pretty tasty stuff.
Yeah, and I like what you said about structure. Like, this wine is plush in the fruit, but it's struck in like the front of the mouth, but it's structured in the back, and it has black currant and tannins that you want, especially if you want to eat meat with this wine. Which, let's be honest, this wine, Cabernet Sauvignon in general, lends itself to meat. But I also think, like, for me, this is, again, I think we talked about this with Chenin Blanc from South Africa, but this really is like the bridge between old world and new world. It's hard to classify South African wines as new world because
they're 400 plus years old.
It's the oldest place on earth as far as we know. But technically, as they tend to fall more new world. But anyway, this for me is more actually on the Bordeaux level actually than even Napa, because you have so much like of that really wonderful earthiness and structure there, as opposed to a lot of that just hit you over the head with ripe fruit and high alcohol.
Right. Yeah, it's not jammy at all. Like it doesn't, it has, if anything, it has a hint of that, like you were saying, that like a little bit of ripe fruit character, but it's not cooked or stewed or any of those other kind of, wine qualifiers that we use in the industry, which can be totally personal or totally arbitrary, just depending on who you are and what wine nerd circle that you run in and who you talk to on a daily basis. But yeah, I think as far as what's in the glass, great example of what Cabernet can be, especially kind of overperforming for where it is.
Yeah, and I think also what's fun, especially for you out there who are buying this wine, if you look on the back of it, I don't know how much you can see, but they do
gotcha.
For you. They tell you, and they have it's coffee beans, mint, black currant, cigar box, cedar, and dried cherry. It's like, we really wasted our last 15 minutes here because they did all the work for us right there. But that is fun when you're like kind of tasting this wine, and then you're saying, oh yeah, I definitely get that cedar box. I get that dried cherry. I get that black currant, I just think that's a nice thing for people, like when you're trying to learn about wines and trying to apply things, and they have that on the back there, because Chardonnay in a very similar fashion. So
right, and then for like the more novice drinker or somebody who is trying to get more into wine, having those descriptors from the winemaker or from the the enologist, like having like, these are what we picked up on, and kind of can give you clues to what to look for if you're just trying to, like, I don't know what the difference between lemon peel and lemon pith is. And then you can kind of learn how to focus your palate on what is black currant. Most folks don't have the opportunity to eat black currants in the States, which is super unfortunate because it is delicious. And then, or like tobacco or cigar box, like it said, a lot of people nowadays don't even have the smell of tobacco, where it kind of reminds me of my grandpa, and like he used to smoke a pipe, and so that kind of sweet, like kind of wet tobacco-y, woodsy kind of fragrance is a nice kind of remembrance of the childhood past, and those like nuances that you kind of picked up on that you didn't know were nuances in your past, kind of get to relive it, which is quite fun.
I always say, because somebody texted me the other day who I had suggested a wine, and they were like, man, I drank that bottle and it literally took me back to being, in the cabin with my grandpa, and such and such amount. I'm like, the wine's doing its job, man. Like, if it reminds you and takes you to a certain place because of a smell or something like that, and then the taste and the feeling, like, that's that's the beauty of wine, you know, because
Sure.
it is from a place. It is telling a story. It's telling a story of a vintage, of a harvest, of people, and you know, and so when it can take you back there because of certain smells, like that's it. That's
Yeah.
job well done. Bravo.
Exactly. Kind of, like grandma's cookie recipe, being
Yeah,
passed down and then finally figuring out like, oh, that's what she meant by a pinch of whatever. And, those dishes or those smells or those, memories that we have that are, not just thoughts, but they're actually like tactile and very sensory driven. And it's really great. I think it's a way to travel without going anywhere is
hmm,
another thing I was talking about earlier today. And it's just wine is so expressive of the place, and when you actually get to taste things and be like, okay, and then when you hopefully eventually get to go there, then you can kind of put those pieces back and hopefully make new memories and learn even more about fun stuff to drink.
totally. I mean, that's what I always say. Also, wine it encompasses everything: science, history, geography, language. I mean, literally every subject goes into wine when you think
Oh
about
yeah,
it. So
yeah,
drink more
wine
wine.
is great. Drink more wine, 100%. Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining me tonight for a impromptu Wines Day, solo edition. Hopefully, we get to share this with folks over the next couple of days. Wines were the Zardetto Private Cuvee, that little bit of Chardonnay Moscato blended into that Glera grape, which was just really elevates that kind of style. And then the Glenelly South African Cab. So classic structure from Bordeaux with a little bit of New World flair and just really great stuff. So Matt, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your holidays, and hopefully everything is looks up and goes much smoother than it might have done this past year. And
Yeah,
we will see you on another Wines Day.
I would love to. Thanks for
Awesome.
as always.
Yeah.
Happy
Thank you very
holidays,
much.
everybody.
Yeah.
Groovy.